Hi, it's Stephen Shalowitz here from the One Way Ticket Show. I'm excited to announce our new YouTube channel where we're featuring some of our classic episodes and releasing new ones as well. Do subscribe to the channel and make sure you ring that bell below so you never miss an episode.
From New York City, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and this is the One Way Ticket Show. Hello and welcome once again to another episode of the show where we explore with our guests where they'd go if given a one-way ticket, no coming back. Their destinations may be in the past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind, but once again, the only caveat, there's no coming back. Now, you can listen to all episodes on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. Once again, theonewayticketshow.com. You got to put the before One Way Ticket Show. And of course, you can listen to the show wherever you like to download your podcast. And while you're at it, do rate and review us because that makes it easier for more folks around the world to find us. And one more point of housekeeping. If you haven't done so already, do follow me on all social media at Stephen Shalowitz. Once again, at Stephen Shalowitz. And Stephen is spelled with a V. All right, as for this episode, it's an absolute honor for me to welcome statesman and attorney Jeh Johnson to the program. A partner in the law firm of Paul Weiss, Rivkin, Wharton, and Garrison, Johnson served with distinction in key positions, both in the Clinton and Obama administrations, and most recently and notably as Secretary of Homeland Security from 2013 to 2017. Secretary Johnson's resume is extensive and includes serving on the board of directors of Lockheed Martin, U.S. Steel, MetLife, the Council on Foreign Relations, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum right here in New York City, and he is also a trustee of his law school alma mater, Columbia University. His awards are equally numerous, including receiving the 2018 Ronald Reagan Peace Through Strength Award. Plus, for jazz lovers, and count me in the club, you should know that Secretary Johnson is the host of his own radio show. It's called All Things Soul. It's on WBGO 88.3, and that is on the FM dial. We'll have Secretary Johnson's full bio and all his relevant links on the show notes page of this very episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com. But for now, to share his one-way ticket destination of choice and a whole lot more, we warmly welcome Secretary Jeh Johnson to the One-Way Ticket Show, who joins us on the line via Zoom from his home office in the Garden State of New Jersey, and more specifically, Montclair. Welcome to the program, Mr. Secretary.
Stephen, that was a generous but also accurate introduction. You've got every fact correct. Thank you very much.
Well, listen, I don't want to mess around with the former Homeland Security Secretary, so I better make sure that my facts are right.
I do have to say this. Many people have asked me, why don't I have a podcast? Why am I hosting a radio show? And the answer is I'm a bit old-fashioned. I grew up on AM and FM radio. And more than the interviews that I have on my radio show, I enjoy sharing classic R&B music with listeners across the tri-state area. So some people play golf on weekends. I host a radio show.
I'm going to ask you a little bit later on in our conversation about your radio gig, but just as a little bit of a tease, I want to know what's on your playlist, Mr. Secretary.
Well, my next show will be July 22nd, and my interviewee will be WBGO's most popular DJ, a fellow by the name of Felix Hernandez, who also has an R&B show on weekends. His listenership is enormous. The loyalty that Felix Hernandez generates is enormous. And so I decided I'm just going to interview him because my show is the warm-up for his show. So my genre is classic R&B. That encompasses several generations of R&B. It goes back to the 1950s with the Dells, Aretha at her earliest point, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Smokey Robinson, all the way into the 1990s with people like Alicia Keys. You know, we say that contemporary music is the here and now, but classic can encompass multiple generations. And so my playlist for any given show will encompass several decades worth of music.
Well, we're going to talk more about that towards the second half, or in the second half of our conversation. But for the moment, I want to begin our conversation by asking you the question that I ask all of my guests here on the One Way Ticket Show podcast. If I gave you a one-way ticket, Mr. Secretary, past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind, where would you go?
I have thought a lot about your question. And if I had a one-way ticket to any place, any time, from which I could not return, I would go to Birmingham, Alabama, May 20th, 1961. I would have to also make myself older, because on May 20, 1961, I was 3 years old going on 4. I was born in 1957. So to take this imaginary ride one way, I'd have to add 16 years to my life. I would be 19 going on 20.
Mm-hmm.
The summer that I was just completing my junior year of college, or I'm just completing my sophomore year of college, I believe. Yes, going into my junior year. Now I have to provide context, obviously. So 1961 was the early phases of the civil rights movement in this country. And the summer of 1961 were the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides were busloads of civil rights workers who intended to go from Washington, D.C. across the Southeast to New Orleans to test Southern resistance to what the Supreme Court said, that buses should not be segregated across the South. Supreme Court made those rulings years before, but they had never been enforced in the South. And so the Freedom Riders wanted to ride the buses in interstate commerce in integrated fashion to say, hey, we're here to comply with the law, enforce the law, so that the nation will live up to its promise. The original Freedom Riders left Washington, D.C. on May 4. They were interrupted by the Klan. One bus was met with violence in Anniston, Alabama, and another bus was met with violence in Birmingham, Alabama. One bus was actually firebombed. And so the riders decided that they were simply going to complete the journey by flying to New Orleans. Then SNCC steps into the picture. The Student Coordinating Committee put out a call to college students to resume the rides in Birmingham, Alabama to go to New Orleans. I'd like to think that if I were 19 years old, going on 20, a college student, I would have answered that call. I would have had the courage then to answer that call. And the reason that I ponder that question is because I'm of the generation that some of us like to say we were martyrs without a cause. I was born in 1957. I'm a student of history. When I was 19, I was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. The most famous graduate of Morehouse College is Martin Luther King, class of 48. I'm class of 79. Those of us in my class, in my generation, which included Martin Luther King III, my lifelong friend, were sort of rebels without a cause. The civil rights movement, for the most part, by 1975, 78, as we know it, was largely over. And we were the beneficiaries of that movement. I certainly, for all of my life, have been the beneficiary of the movement led by the generation before me, which included a lot of students. And so I often ask myself, if I had been in the generation preceded me, would I have answered the call to participate in the Freedom Rides, in the Selma to Montgomery March, for example, the March on Washington? Would I have answered the call? Would I have had the courage to answer that call? And I'd like to hope and believe that the answer is yes. And so if I had the one-way ticket you offer me, I would travel in time and space to Birmingham, Alabama, May 20, 1961, to know whether I'd answer the call as a Morehouse College student then to go to Birmingham and resume the Freedom Rides. The other thing I'll add to that, there's also special personal significance to me, because My grandfather was president of Fisk University in the 40s and 50s, and many of the students who did answer the call were Fisk students. And my mother's ancestry is from Selma, Alabama. So thinking about your question, that's how I would answer your question.
And what I think is so interesting, Mr. Secretary, is that it's a destination that you've thought about long before I asked you the question.
Yes. Well, your question provided focus, a precise date and place.
And certainly you have a history of participation in movement, shall we say, because I know that you also marched in Georgia to promote Martin Luther King Day as a public holiday, right?
Yes,
when you were a student.
Yes, when I was a Morehouse student in 1978, Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's widow, arranged for a group of us in the living room of her home to lead this march for a state holiday for her husband's birthday. But that's really nothing compared to the danger and the risk that the generation before me faced in the Freedom Rides or the Selma to Montgomery March. And one of the people I think of, Stephen, when I pose this question is George Bundy Smith. Who is George Bundy Smith? George Bundy Smith, in the summer of 1961, was a Yale law student who participated in the Freedom Rides, who by leaving law school and going on the Freedom Ride risked it all, because he could have been arrested, kicked out of law school, become ineligible to become a member of the bar, or he could have lost his life or been seriously physically injured. And he participated in the Freedom Rides. He risked it all and became a judge on New York State's highest court, the New York State Court of Appeals.
That's fantastic.
But this is someone who had the courage to step forward in 1961 and answer this call.
Well, Congressman John Lewis was one of the Freedom Riders. I know one of Bobby Kennedy's aides was also a Freedom Rider as well, as many others. Had you spoken to them about their experiences? And what are any recollections?
I certainly knew John Lewis. I've never had a conversation firsthand with a Freedom Rider. What struck me when you look at the list, there's a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, an old Greyhound bus station that's been converted into a museum. And there's a list of the Freedom Riders. Many of them are white. The white Freedom Riders, when they were caught by the Klan, were often beaten up worse than the black Freedom Riders. And there were some who were simply exchange students at black colleges. There was at least one Freedom Rider, as I recall, who was an exchange student to Fisk in Nashville. And I think one white Freedom Rider who was an exchange student to Spelman College in Atlanta. That took enormous conviction and courage among all of them. And so to me, that is hugely motivating and impressive.
Right. What message then did this nonviolent act on the part of the Freedom Riders show the South, the whole country? Because while they were peaceful, the response wasn't.
Right. And they knew it was likely they'd be met by violence.
Yeah.
It was simply young people highlighting that America needed to live up to an unkept promise. The Supreme Court said they had the right to do this. President Kennedy, when he campaigned for president in 1960, said he had the right to do this. They had the right to do this. And so this highlighted an unkept promise, as did the larger civil rights movement. And that's often the way Dr. King would pose it.
And interestingly, Dr. King did not participate in the Freedom Rides. I know he gave moral support, but I believe he said he was on probation, if I'm correct, and said that he couldn't afford another arrest. And I'm wondering if you can weigh in on that. Did you ever speak to his son about that?
That's a plausible explanation. By the way, I'm reading the latest King biography that just came out, which is fascinating because it reveals new details about his life. That to me is a very plausible explanation. I think the other explanation is probably his presence on the Freedom Rides may have attracted more undue attention to create security risk for the others who were on the Freedom Rides. So I certainly don't fault him in any way for not being there.
Right. What would you like to tell them on this one-way ticket journey of yours? Because you're going to have the knowledge from today, Mr. Secretary, to take back in time. What would you like to tell them of our time today? And I'm going to divide the them into two. One, the Freedom Riders, and then the others, those that attack them.
Well, in my way of thinking, when you invite me on this one-way ticket, I would not have the benefit of a crystal ball, being able to see into the future. Of course, if I could, I would say it's going to be all right and you're going to change America for the better. So don't get discouraged. You know, as I see it, my journey back to 1961 presents an uncertain future. If I knew the future, I'd be a billionaire because I'd also be playing the stock market while I was on the Freedom Rides. I'd be investing in U.S. Steel and other companies. But certainly, if I met a Freedom Rider today who would be somewhere in their 80s, I would say, thank you for your courage to make a more perfect union.
And if you met one that attacked the Freedom Riders, what would you say to them?
You're on the wrong side of history, and you will go down in history as such, and nothing will make that right.
Just building on the question, though, and assuming that you wouldn't know then what you know now. However, if you were to say to a Freedom Rider, by the way, over the next 50, 60 years, we'll have a Black president, twice elected, a Black female vice president, 2 Black secretaries of state. One happens to be a Black woman born in Birmingham, Secretary of Defense Black, a Homeland Security secretary who's Black. His name, by the way, is Jeh Johnson. I'm sure you've heard of him. Not to mention the richest woman in the United States, Oprah Winfrey, and on and on and on. I wonder what their response would be, though. I mean, would their response, you think, be, yes, we are laying the foundation and we know that the fruits will bear of what we are doing right now? Or do you think that they would say, you know what, the racial divide is just simply too sharp, that 50, 60 years is just not enough time for all of this to happen?
Well, you know, Bobby Kennedy, before he was assassinated in 1968, I believe predicted that over the next 40 years, there would be a Black president. But I want to answer your question this way. My graduation speaker at Columbia Law School in 1982 was none other than Andrew Young. And I remember one thing.
By the way, do you want to share with our listeners who might not be familiar with who he is, who Andrew Young is, because we have a very international audience?
Andrew Young was one of Martin Luther King's closest confidants. Like King, he was a preacher. He's still living. He's 92 years old.
You interviewed him, didn't you?
I did. I interviewed him for my radio show.
Yes.
In January. He was one of King's closest friends and confidants. He was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the Selma to Montgomery March. He was my graduation speaker in 1982 when he was mayor of Atlanta, Georgia. And he said something I've never forgotten that I repeat in every graduation speech I give. In your lifetime, you will see and do things beyond your current comprehension as you are sitting here right now. So that was 1982. And I look back on that 41 years ago, and I realize now that he was right, because at that moment, there was another Black kid on the Columbia campus with an African first name, Barack, who was going to be the first Black president of the United States. And that would have been beyond my current comprehension. And I was going to be in his cabinet, leading something called the Department of Homeland Security, which didn't even exist in 1982. And so the direct answer to your question is, I think most civil rights activists, most African Americans in 1961 would have said, yes, this is something that we could see happening, perhaps not as soon as it did.
Interesting. And in this notion of going back in time, given our time today, is there something from our time today, a piece of technology, for example, or whatever it is, that would just blow the minds of people back in 1961?
Yes.
What do you
This
think?
device right here, the iPhone. If you had said to me or my dad in 1961, my dad was 30 years old in 1961, or if you'd said to me in 1975, the year I finished high school, or 1979, the year I finished college, or 1982, the year I finished law school, that one day there's going to be a device which you can hold in the palm of your hand that serves as A, a telephone, B, a mail service, an instantaneous mail service with no paper, no post office, C, a library, a global library with no books, D, a calendar, E, a camera, a motion picture camera, another way to watch television, a calculator, a map, a weather forecast, all and a music library. You can call up any song you want instantaneously, all in the palm of your hand. That would have been beyond my current. That the sheer internet would have been beyond my comprehension, or the comprehension certainly of anybody living in the 1960s, except for somebody, the most forward-thinking person imaginable.
Mr. Secretary, as a child, I used to want to have a phone where I could see the other person at the other end, like a video phone.
Right.
And I used to think that that would be just the absolute best. And now to have it, so it goes back to what you were saying about Andrew Young and in his quote there. Again, the things that are going to happen are just really quite remarkable. A couple other bases on your one-way ticket journey that I want to ask you before we move on to a couple other subjects. So how do you think your life would have unfolded? You hinted at it, but how do you think the trajectory, what do you think that trajectory would be like?
Well, I'd like to think that the basic trajectory of my life and my career would have been largely the same. Instead of graduating from Morehouse College in 1979, I would have graduated from Morehouse College in 1963. Instead of finishing law school in 1982, I would have finished Columbia Law School in 1966. Instead of joining I'm exactly 16 years older in this scenario. Instead of joining the Obama administration in 2009, hopefully I would have joined the Clinton administration in 1993, just 16 years older, and hopefully ultimately served in his cabinet in the second term of his presidency from 1997 to 2001 instead of 2013 to 2017. And hopefully, if I were in good health, I'd be alive today at age 81.
All right.
Just like I am right now.
All right. Well, I want to ask you about politics and your perhaps involvement in it in just a short while. But as we wind down again, this part of our conversation, do you think the hopes of those freedom riders have been realized? I mean, of course, there was the desegregation of transportation, but I'm talking about their larger hopes.
Yes.
Where do you see that?
So I can answer that question by telling you what Andrew Young told me in January, that Dr. King's hopes and dreams, if he could see them today realized, would be ecstatic, would say that all of his work has been successful, but the work is not done. It's not complete. I think those who pursued a more perfect union to force the nation to live up to its promises, its constitution, its laws, would deem successful all the progress we have made to date, but say the work is not done.
You know, one of my favorite quotes of Dr. King's is, we all came in on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And I'm wondering if you can respond to that, because sometimes I feel like today we've lost that in our country.
I believe we have, to a very large extent. You know, it wasn't that long ago, it was 1988, that Ronald Reagan said, "We are a nation of immigrants. You can go to France and never be French. You can go to Germany and never be German. You can go to Japan and never be Japanese, but you can come to America and be American." And I think that statement is so right. I used to repeat it in naturalization ceremonies. And it is also true in my belief that for every step forward we make, every giant step forward we make, there is often a reactionary step backward. But as Franklin Roosevelt said, you can tell I'm a student of history, in his last inaugural address, the trajectory of this nation is forever upward. Progress is not linear. The arc of history is long, but it bends upward. And so I continue to believe that though we have blowback from time to time in some of the progress we've made, our trajectory is forever upward.
So you're hopeful.
Yes. Although it's sometimes challenging to be hopeful when you look at what's going on in the world today.
You know, one of my favorite quotes is from the late Israeli statesman Shimon Peres, who said there are two types of people, optimists and pessimists, but it's more fun to go through life as an optimist.
Right. That's
right.
correct.
You know,
Yes.
Anyway. Well, listen, do send us a postcard from 1961. But I want to switch gears now for a moment and talk about a few other subjects, Mr. Secretary. And, you know, I saw the episode of Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates that you were on, you were featured. And for our dear listeners, that was season 9, episode 8. It was released on the 21st of February of this year, 2023. So people can check it out online. I must say I was really choked up when I saw that episode. And I want you to comment and answer the question. And for the benefit of our listeners, Professor Gates showed and unearthed the fact that your fourth great-grandfather was a white man. His name was Aaron Clore, and he owned your fourth great-grandmother, and her name was Eliza Clore. My question to you, after I saw the episode, I wanted to know, have you been in contact with the Clore family?
Yes, I have. Right after that show, I started receiving emails and phone calls from all these Clores in Madison County, Virginia. The Clore family is actually it's a large but fairly cohesive family unit in that part of the state of Virginia. They're all very aware of their ancestry. And when they saw that I was part of that, they started reaching out to me. And if I could betray a little bit about the episode, what Skip Gates focused on was that Aaron Clore, the slave owner, and Eliza, his slave, had 10 children together, 10. And one of whom was my direct ancestor. And Aaron Clore's father, Peter Clore, fought in the American Revolutionary War. That episode also revealed I have ancestors several who fought in the Civil War, including one who fought in the very bloody battle called the Battle of the Crater in Petersburg, Virginia, July 1864, and a host of other things. But I think the most interesting thing for Skip Gates was he profiled me alongside Angela Davis.
Right.
And he didn't say this explicitly in the show, but he's profiling a 60s radical along with a guy he considers to be Mr. Establishment. And we had similar genealogical tracks. What I found most interesting about her side of the episode was that she did not know her two white grandfathers, one of whom was a lawyer in Birmingham, Alabama, and probably a member of the White Citizens Council.
Right.
It's extraordinary. Angela Davis's grandfather.
Yeah, exactly. The things that you unearth about one's family. And one of the things that had me particularly choked up was how Aaron's children from Eliza, and indeed Eliza as well, they didn't have their names. They were just,
Correct.
Right? Do you want to share that with our listeners?
The census.
Yeah, the census.
1860 census that he showed me, they were all just numbers.
Yeah.
Just colored slaves with numbers and ages. That was it.
Right. And there was one woman that was 45 and one that was 50. So one
Right.
of them was Eliza. We just don't know
Correct.
which one. And again, well, we've come a long way. So
Your
anyway,
research is extraordinary.
pardon me?
Your research is extraordinary.
Listen, I like to do my homework, Mr. Secretary,
Right.
you know,
You've done your
beforehand.
homework.
Yes. Well, if you want me to share another piece of homework, because I want to talk about your time as Homeland Secretary. I know that you were
Sure.
Secretary by your own counting for 1,124 days.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I was counting.
You were
I had
counting.
an app on my phone that
You had an
counted
app on your phone to count.
days, hours, minutes. Right.
Yes.
January 2017 at noon when I would
And
be.
so to take a big step back before we get to the very end of your tenure, it's highly unlikely at this point in my life that someone's going to call me up and ask me to be Homeland Security Secretary. I don't think that's going to happen. In your case, I mean, you had such a stellar career beforehand. And again, we're going to have your bio on the show notes page of this episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com, so people can really know what you did beforehand. So clearly you were an excellent choice. I'm wondering though, how do you get the call though? Who makes the call and what do they ask you?
Well, this is how it happened. I was on Martha's Vineyard with my wife and family, August 2013. I had left being general counsel of the Defense Department 8 months before in the Obama administration. I thought I was done with public service. I was back in private law practice. And I received this email from Valerie Jarrett saying the president would like it if you could come to a very small, intimate cocktail party. He'd like to see you, which was a surprise because I was out of his administration. And so my wife and I went to this cocktail party on Martha's Vineyard, August 2013. And I see Valerie Jarrett, who says, the president might ask you to come back to his administration. And then I saw Susan Rice at the same party, who said, the president might like you to come back to his administration. And then I saw the president. He said, I might like you to come back to my administration. And I said, as what? He said, we'll talk. And so I left that party very excited, but puzzled. And then about a week or two later, while I was in business in Hong Kong in the middle of the night, I received a phone message from Dennis McDonough, the president's chief of staff, to say, the president would like you to be Secretary of Homeland Security, which was a huge shock. I did not see that coming. I never aspired to that job. I didn't imagine myself in that job.
What did you think they were going to ask you to do?
Possibly White House counsel, possibly Attorney General, but neither one of them had left. There was no turnover. And so this other thing came totally out of left field, which DHS is much bigger than the Department of Justice.
It's the third largest cabinet department.
Correct, after Defense and Veterans Affairs. And so I was stunned. I had to think about it for about 45 minutes. And then I came back to him and I said, yes, let's do it. And so we went through the whole process of the vetting and the Senate confirmation. And I was confirmed December 23, 2013.
And so I would imagine, Mr. Secretary, that it was a true honor to be asked and to serve. Yet it must have been an incredibly stressful situation to be in, because I don't think people realize all the different components that are under Homeland Security. You have TSA, Customs and Border Protection. You have the Coast Guard. You have the Secret Service, which I always thought that it was under Treasury, or maybe they moved it over.
Used to be under Treasury.
Right. You have FEMA and on. There's over 200 cybersecurity. Yes, which I'm going to ask you about. Over 230 folks are working in Homeland Security.
230,000.
230,000. That's why I'm not an accountant. That's why I'm a podcaster. I'm not too good with numbers. But over 230,000. So, you know, that must have been just an enormous, I don't want to use the word awesome because I think the word awesome is overused today, but let me use it though. That's an awesome task. So how did you approach it?
Well, first of all, lawyering is not a natural job skill for leading. I hate to tell lawyers that, but it's true. You have to learn to delegate. You have to learn to trust others. Mm-hmm. And the Department of Homeland Security seems very big. because of its diverse missions and all of those agencies you just rattled off. The reality is it's a fraction of the size of the Department of Defense, but it feels big because of all these different missions: disaster relief, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, immigration, southern border, Secret Service, fence jumpers at the White House. I could go on, aviation security, TSA, I could go on and on. But if you have good component leaders who know how to run things, it can work.
Yeah, clearly, I mean, you have a command of management and management skills to be able to really coalesce all this and to put it all together. You know, there are a number of issues of the day that I would love to chat with you about, and I'd actually love to have you back to talk about some of them, like border, like immigration, because we could have a 12,000-hour conversation on each one of those. But I do want to tick off in the time that we have too, and then get on to a few other points before we push off. The first is cybersecurity, and just a quick anecdote and then a question. After Russia invaded Ukraine, several days later, I went to the bank and I went to my favorite teller. Her name's Jackie. And I took out cash and I asked Jackie to give it to me in small notes. And I asked her, I said, do you know why I'm doing this? And she said, yes. She said, you're not the only one. And people are also buying booze. That was her response to me. And for the benefit of our listeners that might need the dots connected, of course, we're talking about cybersecurity. And if the Russians would hack or have the ability to hack our banking system, then what? And so I wanted to ask you about cybersecurity because I know that as Secretary of DHS, you push for CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. You worked on it. It was formed during the last administration. So I'm wondering, when you think about cybersecurity, Mr. Secretary, what keeps you up at night? What should we as laymen know? What should we not know because it's going to keep us up at night?
That's an interesting way to ask the question. So
I sometimes feel like ignorance is bliss, you know.
It can be. My biggest fear in the cybersecurity world are offensive cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in this country. There's a lot in critical infrastructure in this country. There's something like 16 or 17 sectors of critical infrastructure, including the defense industrial base, financial services, I could go on and on. The implantation of malware in an interlocked piece of critical infrastructure that can be activated at any moment to degrade a system, to take down a system, to fry a system. We all know about ransomware attacks, which occur on a daily basis. I do worry about a catastrophic cyber attack on critical infrastructure in this country. Those on offense are constantly ingenious, creative, thinking of new ways to penetrate our cybersecurity, and those of us on defense struggle to keep up. You're right, I pushed for the creation of CISA, the new cybersecurity agency, and I'm glad it's created. And I think it's off to a pretty good start.
Should we be concerned? I mean, the average American, should we be concerned about any of this? Or do you think that,
yes,
hey, the government's got it under control?
Most of cybersecurity in this country is in private hands. The responsibility for most of cybersecurity has to be in private hands. Most of critical infrastructure in this country is in private hands. Therefore, the defense of our cyberspace has to be principally in private hands. The government is there to, for lack of a better word, counterattack. The government is there to detect, interdict, hopefully. But ultimately, cybersecurity of a bank like the one you described, or a college or university, or a law firm, or anything else is the responsibility of private actors to safeguard their own systems. The government can't be everywhere.
So that creates a bit of anxiety for yours truly.
Some are very sophisticated. You know, the defense industry, financial services are very, very sophisticated when it comes to this stuff. Others are not, and still a work in progress.
And that's what we have to be concerned about. I wanted to ask you about AI, and I don't have a question in particular, but what's sort of swimming around in my head is, are we ahead of the game when it comes to AI vis-a-vis security, Homeland Security?
Yes and no. We're ahead of the game in the development of AI to a degree that the public at large does not understand. So about a year ago, I was very concerned that our advances in AI are happening so fast that the public is not aware of what we are doing. The public is not aware of the capabilities in AI and is exceeding our understanding. There's been a lot of attention focused on this within the last 12 months or so, as evidenced by your question. You could have asked me a lot of different questions about Homeland Security. You asked me about AI. So the public awareness of it is catching up. And I'm not sure that the public is ready for the answer. I'm not sure that we are moving to a place the public really wants. You know, one of my concerns about AI is, we have the ability now to think on our own behalf. AI can do our thinking for us. Doesn't that degrade, disincentivize the creativity of the human mind? Certainly in the legal profession, AI can do a lot of our thinking for us. AI can generate a whole legal brief for you. There was a story in the New York Times recently about a court submission from a lawyer that was a brief, and the adversaries went to read the brief and look up the cases cited in the brief and discovered that the cases were totally fictitious, although the brief read well. So AI can do a lot of our thinking for us. And I'm concerned that we're moving to a place that America at large will not readily accept.
Do you still get security briefings?
How do I answer that question? In my private life, I have occasion to get a certain form of security briefings. I'll answer it that way.
Got it. We'll move on then. So have you considered running for office?
No. Well, no would be a lie. Yes, but my ultimate answer to that question that I ask myself every once in a while is no, I don't want to do that.
But under what circumstance would you take another executive branch position?
Well, the higher up you go in government, the fewer jobs there are left that you'd be willing to take. And
see, because I can see you as Secretary of State.
Well, I'm pretty comfortable in my private life. I'd have to give up my radio show if I became Secretary of State.
This is true.
I'm pretty comfortable in my private life right now. And you kind of have to know when to hang it up. So
You're still so young, though. I mean, you've got a lot of years.
Well, thank you for saying 65 is young.
Well, it is.
I've completed 2 really difficult jobs now. And sometimes you can overstay your welcome. You can get back in that ring one too many times.
See, I've got an idea. Why doesn't someone in the next administration, Democrat or Republican, because you are, in my mind, a very moderate, thoughtful individual. I think someone should appoint you ambassador to a really important country, and you can still do your radio show from that country.
Well, a lot of ambassadors, they have to have their own entertainment budgets. So you have a lot of ambassadors who are rich. Look, I'm very happy in my private life. I've given at the office. I've been in public service 4 times in the course of my career. And, I believe very much in the citizen public servant model that our founding fathers envisioned, where private citizens would step into government for a time, then leave, go back to the farm, harvest their crops, and get on with their life. And that's kind of how I see myself.
By the way, you could DJ your own parties at the ambassador's residence, wherever that is.
By the way, you've obviously done a lot of really, really good research on my background. One thing that is probably not reflected on the public record that unfortunately your listeners will not be able to see is what I'm showing you right now.
It's a train.
It's a train. It's two trains.
Okay. And where are these trains?
They're actually in the basement of my home here in Montclair, New Jersey. That is that is my HO scale train set. And that is my other hobby in addition to my radio show.
I like that. Well, listen, we'll have you back on to talk about your train hobby, but in just a couple of minutes that we have remaining, I do want to talk. We started out at the beginning talking about your radio show. That's how we're going to wind down our conversation right now. So once again, we want to share with our listeners, it's WBGO 88.3 FM. And just tell us a little bit about the show and what people can expect and so on. And you've had, by the way, some amazing guests. You've had Bill Clinton, you've had Wolf Blitzer, Henry Louis Gates, and so on.
Yes. So I grew up with classic R&B. In my opinion, people's ear for music tends to be formed in their teenage years. So for me, that's the 1970s. So I grew up with classic R&B. I actually started off with WABC radio, AM radio. You're way too young to remember WABC. 770 AM radio in New York, plays all the hits.
Well, I'm from Chicago, so.
Whatever the top 10 was, WABC was going to play it, which was a really fully integrated set of music. You could have, the Beatles, Johnny Cash, and Smokey Robinson all in the top 10, and ABC, you could hear the same song 3 times in an hour because it just top 10 over and over and over again. And then I migrated to FM in the late 70s here in New York, WBLS. And then I went to college in the South in Atlanta, and that's where my ear for R&B really took off. And I've been an R&B fan ever since. My brother-in-law 29 years ago told me about WBGO, which is a jazz station on weekdays here in New York, New Jersey. It's based in Newark, New Jersey. It's public radio. And on weekends, on Saturdays, it's R&B. The DJ is Felix Hernandez. And I became a huge Felix Hernandez fan, listened to him every Saturday. Even when I was living in Washington, I listened online. I became a member of the board of directors of WBGO, and I would go on air to help fundraise. And finally, about a year and a half ago, the station manager said, "How would you like to have your own show?" And I'd say, that would be like fantasy camp for me. And so once a month on WBGO, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Saturdays, and lead into Felix Hernandez, you can hear all things soul with Jeh Johnson. And I spent a lot of time developing my playlist. And I have one interview per show, as you pointed out. And my first interview, my debut show in March of 22, was Bill Clinton, the saxophonist, Bill Clinton. And we had a great time.
He was also president, right?
He was also the 42nd president of the United States.
That's what I understand, yes.
Right.
Are you going to get your other old boss on the show?
We'll have to work up to that. But I started off big, obviously. I mean, there's how many other former presidents are there out there? And so that helped attract to my show others by telling them Bill Clinton was my first interview. So you're right. I've had Wolf Blitzer. I've had Robert Johnson, the founder of BET. Last month, I had Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC as a guest on the show. I've had Jonathan Capehart. I've had Henry Louis Gates. And a host of others. It's really been interesting. Andrew Young, MLK Day weekend, Charlene Hunter Galt, the civil rights stalwart. It's really been a wonderful experience. It's a hobby,
right,
and I really enjoy it.
Well, listen, we enjoyed listening to you, and we so enjoyed having you on this episode of the One Way Ticket Show. Mr. Secretary, I really would love to have you back to talk more, because there are tons of other things and other bases that I wanted to cover. But in the interest of time, we just want to thank you so much for joining us once again here on the One Way Ticket Show.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed our discussion, Stephen.
All right. And we'll have info about all things Secretary Johnson on the show notes page of this episode on our website, theonewayticketshow.com, including to link to all things Soul. So do check it out. And also for those of you who love to travel, we didn't talk about travel, Mr. Secretary, but we're going to have to next time. For all of you who love to travel as I do, and I'm sure the Secretary does as well, we'd like to remind you to check out Travel Wi-Fi Sapphire devices. It's the secure pocket-sized Wi-Fi devices you can use in over 130 countries worldwide. Visit travelwifi.com for more. And for 10% off rental or purchases of a Sapphire, use the promo code TOWTS. Once again, TOWTS stands for The One-Way Ticket Show. It's all lowercase, very clever. And no matter where you are in the world, just shoot me an email, Stephen at theonewayticketshow.com. Stephen with a V, Stephen at theonewayticketshow.com. Do share your one-way ticket destination, and let's even arrange a call to chat, because I'm always up for a great conversation. Meantime, it's a wrap for this edition of the One-Way Ticket Show. For Secretary Jeh Johnson and the entire crew, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, and we'll see you next time.